They say the most dangerous lies aren't the ones spoken by our enemies, but the ones wrapped in a warm hug from the people we love the most. My name is Eleanor Vance. For 35 years, I taught high school English, dissecting the tragic flaws of Shakespearean kings and the quiet desperation of modern American protagonists. You would think that spending decades analyzing human nature would make me immune to deception, but there is a blind spot in every mother's vision, a willful ignorance that comes with loving your only child. I live on a sprawling 120-acre property in the Hudson Valley. It isn't just a piece of land, it is a tapestry of my life. My late husband, Arthur, bought this place 40 years ago. Arthur wasn't a farmer or a cowboy. He was a forensic accountant. He spent his days buried in spreadsheets, untangling corporate tax frauds and finding hidden assets. He was a man who trusted numbers far more than he trusted people. This farm was his sanctuary, his quiet place away from the noise of the city. We planted the oak trees that lined the driveway. We restored the old Victorian farmhouse, sanding the hardwood floors with our own hands. When Arthur passed away 5 years ago from a sudden stroke, the silence in the house was deafening. But I stayed. I found comfort in the routine, tending to my garden, drinking my morning coffee on the wraparound porch, and watching the seasons change the colors of the valley. I thought I would live out the rest of my days here, surrounded by Arthur's memory. My daughter, Chloe, had always been a city girl at heart. Even as a teenager, she despised the dirt and the quiet. She craved bright lights, designer labels, and the kind of validation you can only get from being seen in the right places. At 35, she had achieved the aesthetic she always wanted, mostly thanks to her husband, Derek Preston. Derek was a commercial real estate broker. He was 38, handsome in a very calculated, manicured sort of way. He drove a leased Porsche, wore suits that cost more than my first car, and had a smile that he could turn on and off like a light switch. He smelled of expensive cologne, strong peppermint, and something else I could never quite put my finger on, a kind of relentless, exhausting ambition. They visited me often, usually on Sunday afternoons. On the surface, it looked like the picture-perfect American family. "Mom, this roast is incredible as always," Derek said during one of those typical Sunday dinners in late October. He held his wine glass by the stem, swirling the expensive Pinot Noir he had brought. He always brought the wine, making sure to casually mention the vintage. "Thank you, Derek," I smiled, passing the potatoes. Across the table, Chloe was busy tapping on her iPhone, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the screen. She was wearing a silk blouse that looked entirely out of place in my rustic dining room. "Chloe, honey, no phones at the table," I reminded her gently. She sighed, placing the phone face down. "Sorry, Mom. It's just, the gala committee is a mess this year. I have to micromanage everything." She reached over and patted my hand. "How are you feeling? You look a little tired." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just the weather changing. My left knee has been acting up again." I saw a brief, almost imperceptible glance pass between Chloe and Derek. It was the kind of look couples share when they have had a private conversation about you behind closed doors. "You know, Eleanor?" Derek leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his voice dropping to that smooth, reassuring tone he probably used to close multi-million-dollar deals. "You shouldn't be out here all alone. The maintenance on 120 acres. It's a lot for anyone, let alone someone dealing with joint pain. Chloe and I worry about you constantly." "He's right, Mom," Chloe added, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine concern. "What if you fall? What if there's a snowstorm and the power goes out? You're an hour away from a decent hospital." "I have neighbors, Chloe, and I have Arthur's generator," I replied, feeling a familiar prickle of defensiveness. "This is my home. I'm not going anywhere." Derek immediately backed off, raising his hands in surrender, flashing that bright, practiced smile. "Of course, Eleanor. We just want you to be safe, that's all." I believed them. Why wouldn't I? They were my family. The catalyst came 3 months later, in the dead of winter. The pain in my knee escalated from a dull ache to an agonizing, sharp stab that left me unable to walk down the stairs. The doctor was clear. I needed a total knee replacement surgery immediately. For a fiercely independent woman, becoming physically helpless is a terrifying ordeal. The surgery itself was successful, but the recovery was brutal. I was discharged and sent home with a walker, a visiting nurse who came every other day, and a heavy prescription for oxycodone to manage the intense post-operative pain. If you have ever taken strong narcotic painkillers, you know what it does to your mind. It wraps your brain in a thick, warm fog. The pain disappears, but so does your clarity. Days blur into nights. You lose track of conversations. You drift in and out of a heavy, dreamless sleep. During those first 2 weeks of recovery, Chloe and Derek were surprisingly attentive. They drove up from the city every weekend. Chloe would bring me hot soup, arrange fresh flowers on my nightstand, and sit by my bed holding my hand. Derek was the man of action. He shoveled the driveway, fixed a leaky faucet in the kitchen, and handled the mail. I felt a deep, overwhelming wave of gratitude. I felt so lucky to have a daughter who cared so much. It was a Tuesday afternoon, so the winter sun was setting early, casting long gray shadows across my bedroom. I had just taken my afternoon dose of painkillers and was feeling that familiar, heavy warmth spreading through my limbs. My eyelids were drooping. There was a soft knock on the bedroom door, and Derek walked in. He was still wearing his tailored wool overcoat, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Chloe trailed in right behind him, holding a mug of chamomile tea. "Hey, Mom, how's the pain today?" Chloe asked softly, setting the tea on my nightstand and brushing a strand of hair out of my face. "Tolerable, sweetie," I murmured, my tongue feeling thick and slow. "I'm just very sleepy." "I know, Eleanor. We won't keep you long," Derek said, pulling a chair right up to the side of my bed. He popped the latches on his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers, complete with little yellow sticky notes shaped like arrows. "What's all this?" I asked, squinting at the dense, legal-sized text. The letters seemed to swim on the page. "It's just some administrative paperwork, Mom," Chloe said soothingly. She sat on the edge of the bed, massaging my good leg. "With your medical bills coming in and the property taxes due next month, Derek thought it would be best to set up a line of credit. Just a safety net so you don't have to stress about paying bills while you're healing." "Exactly," Derek chimed in, handing me a silver Mont Blanc pen. "It's a standard healthcare proxy and a limited financial delegation. Basically, it just allows my office to handle the county tax assessors and pay your medical invoices directly from your checking account. That way you don't have to deal with the headache." I tried to focus on the top page, but my vision was blurry. The words fiduciary and authorization floated in front of my eyes. Arthur's voice echoed somewhere in the back of my mind. "Never sign anything you haven't read twice, Ellie." Maybe I should wait until my head is a little clearer," I mumbled, trying to put the pen down. "Or I could have Mitchell look at it." Mitchell was our old family lawyer. Derek didn't miss a beat. His smile remained perfectly fixed, but there was a subtle shift in his tone, a gentle, almost patronizing sigh. "We could do that, Eleanor, but Mitchell charges $400 an hour just to read standard boilerplate forms, and the property tax deadline is Friday. If we miss it, they slap a 5% penalty on the estate. I'm just trying to save you some money and stress." "It's okay, Mom," Chloe whispered. She placed her warm hand over mine, guiding my fingers back to the pen. "Derek does this every day. He reviewed everything. We're just trying to take care of you. Don't you trust us?" "Don't you trust us?" That was the phrase. That was the emotional checkmate. How could a mother look into her only child's eyes while lying helpless in bed and say no? She was my daughter. I had held her when she had a fever. I had paid for her college. I loved her more than life itself. The painkillers pulsed warmly in my veins, telling me to surrender, telling me to let the younger generation take the wheel. "Of course I trust you, sweetheart," I whispered, fighting back a sudden wave of emotional exhaustion. I took the silver pen. With a shaking hand, I flipped to the pages marked with the yellow sticky notes. I didn't read the paragraphs. I didn't see the bold heading hidden beneath the fold that read, "General Durable Power of Attorney. Full Grant of Authority." I simply signed my name, Eleanor Margaret Vance, once Twice. 3 times. Perfect, Derek said smoothly. He didn't snatch the papers. He collected them with a practiced, casual elegance, sliding them back into his leather briefcase until the latch clicked shut. It sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. Get some sleep, Mom. We love you. Chloe kissed my forehead. Her perfume, Chanel No. 5, lingered in the air long after they walked out of the room. I closed my eyes, letting the heavy narcotic sleep pull me under, feeling safe, loved, and protected. I had absolutely no idea that with 3 strokes of a pen, I had just signed away the house I built, the land I loved, and the financial security of my entire life, handing the keys to my kingdom directly to a thief. Here is part 2 of your story. I have focused heavily on building the tension slowly, letting the betrayal unfold through dialogue and subtle actions rather than loud arguments. This creates a much more realistic, devastating impact for the audience, perfectly fitting the brutal betrayal theme. Spring in the Hudson Valley arrives with a quiet determination. The frost retreats, the earth softens, and the world smells of damp soil and renewal. 4 months had passed since my surgery. My knee had healed beautifully. I was walking without a cane, tending to the early buds in my garden, and feeling a renewed sense of independence. The heavy fog of the painkillers was a distant memory. I had my mind, my mobility, and my home back. Or so I thought. It was a Tuesday morning in late April. I was in the kitchen, washing my coffee mug and looking out the window toward the southern pasture. Arthur and I used to sit on the porch and watch the deer graze near the tree line. But that morning, there were no deer. Instead, there was a white pickup truck parked aggressively on the grass, and 2 men in neon yellow vests were driving wooden stakes into the ground. A spike of irritation flared in my chest. Hunters sometimes wandered onto the property by mistake, but it was out of season. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, stepped out onto the back porch, and called out to them. "Excuse me, this is private property." One of the men, holding a digital surveying tablet, looked up and tipped his hard hat. He trudged toward the porch, boots heavy with mud. "Morning, ma'am. Sorry for the noise. We're just finishing up the boundary markers." "Boundary markers for what?" I asked, my voice tight. "I didn't hire any surveyors." The man looked confused. He glanced down at his tablet, swiping a finger across the screen. "You're Mrs. Vance, right? The previous owner?" The world seemed to stop spinning for a fraction of a second. The air left my lungs. "The previous owner?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I am the only owner of this farm." The surveyor frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I just follow the work orders. The client is Oakwood Investment Group. The title cleared yesterday. We were told the property was vacant or in the process of being vacated. If there's a mix-up, you'll have to take it up with the management company." Before I could demand to see his screen, the crunch of gravel echoed down the long driveway. Derek's silver Porsche Panamera glided toward the house, coming to a smooth stop right behind my old Subaru. Derek stepped out first. He wasn't wearing his usual weekend casuals. He was dressed in a sharp, slate-gray business suit, a silk tie perfectly knotted at his throat. He looked like a man arriving for a board meeting, not a family visit. Chloe emerged from the passenger side. She was wearing oversized dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and she kept her head down, avoiding my gaze entirely. "Derek," I called out, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What is going on here? Who are these people? They're talking nonsense about Oakwood Investment Group." Derek didn't rush to greet me. He didn't offer his usual practiced smile. He simply nodded to the surveyor, signaling him to get back to work, and walked up the porch steps. He walked past me, opening the front door of my house without knocking, without asking permission. He walked in like a landlord inspecting a newly acquired asset. Chloe followed him, her heels clicking nervously against the hardwood floor. She still wouldn't look at me. "Let's go inside, Eleanor," Derek said over his shoulder. I followed them into the dining room, the very room where I had hosted every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday for the last 40 years. Derek pulled out a chair at the head of the table, Arthur's chair, and sat down. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, and placed a manila envelope on the polished mahogany surface. "Sit down, Mom," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She stood by the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I don't want to sit," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. "I want an explanation." Derek sighed, folding his hands together on the table. It was the condescending posture of a professional dealing with a difficult client. "Eleanor, we talked about this. The farm is simply too much for you to maintain. The property taxes are rising. The infrastructure is aging. We had to make an executive decision for your own well-being." "An executive decision?" I echoed, staring at him. "About my house?" Derek slid the manila envelope across the table toward me. "The transaction was finalized yesterday afternoon. The deed has been legally transferred to Oakwood Investment Group. They are a commercial development firm. They plan to level the farmhouse and subdivide the acreage for luxury retreats. You have 30 days to vacate the premises, though they'd prefer it if you were out by the end of next week." I stared at the envelope. I didn't touch it. "You sold my house. You forged my signature." "No, Eleanor," Derek corrected smoothly, his eyes cold and unblinking. "I didn't forge anything. You signed a general durable power of attorney back in January. You granted me full fiduciary authority to manage, sell, or liquidate your real estate and financial assets. A notary was present, it's ironclad." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. The winter afternoon, the thick fog of the oxycodone, the yellow sticky notes. Just an administrative safety net to pay your taxes, Mom. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had handed the executioner his axe and placed my own head on the block. "You tricked me," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I was heavily medicated. I trusted you." "We did it to protect you," Derek replied, his tone flat, devoid of any genuine empathy. "If you had fallen again, if you needed long-term care, the state could have come after the estate. This was the most responsible course of action." He tapped the envelope. "Your cut is in there, $18,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage, resolving the back taxes, and deducting standard broker commissions and legal fees, that is your net proceed. It's more than enough to cover the deposit at Golden Pines. It's a very nice assisted living facility in the city." Chloe picked it out herself. $18,000 for 120 acres of prime Hudson Valley real estate, for the house I built, for my entire life. I looked at Derek, really looked at him. I didn't see a son-in-law anymore. I saw a predator who had found a legal loophole to skin me alive. He had sold my property to a shell company, probably one he owned or partnered with, at a massive fabricated discount, only to flip it to developers for millions, pocketing the difference. It was a classic, ruthless real estate maneuver, executed flawlessly against an old woman. But the true heartbreak wasn't Derek. Derek was just a greedy man doing what greedy men do. The true heartbreak was standing by the window. I turned slowly to my daughter, my only child, the girl I had stayed up with through countless fevers, the girl whose college tuition Arthur and I had paid for by sacrificing our own vacations, the girl I loved more than my own breath. "Chloe," I say. My voice wasn't angry, it was shattered. "Tell me you didn't know about this. Tell me he did this behind your back." Chloe finally took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red, puffy, rimmed with smeared mascara. She looked away, staring out at the oak trees her father had planted. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be," she choked out. "Harder?" I took a step toward her. "Chloe, he stole my home. He stole your father's legacy. You let him do this?" Chloe spun around, and to my absolute horror, there was no apology in her eyes. There was only the fierce, ugly desperation of cornered prey. "We didn't have a choice," she yelled, her voice cracking, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Do you know how much debt we're in? Derek's firm lost 3 major clients last year. We are 3 months behind on the mortgage for the townhouse. They were going to repossess my car, Mom. My friends were starting to notice. I can't be bankrupt. I can't lose everything." I stared at her, paralyzed by the sheer selfishness of her words. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for her leased Porsche and her social status. "So you decided to make me homeless to pay off your credit cards?" I asked quietly. "You're 65, Mom." Chloe stepped forward, her tone turning defensive, weaponizing my age against me. "You don't need 100 acres. You don't need this massive house. You sit out here all alone, living in the past. It's depressing. Golden Pines has activities. They have nurses on staff. It's where people your age belong. Derek fixed our financial problems and got you a safe place to live. You should be thanking him instead of looking at us like we're criminals." The room fell dead silent. The only sound was the distant rhythmic thud of the surveyor's hammer driving another stake into my land. You should be thanking him. In all the literature I had taught, in all the Shakespearean tragedies I had read, I had never encountered a betrayal quite as hollow and pathetic as this. There was no grand malice, no poetic vengeance. It was just an entitled daughter and a greedy husband who decided that an old woman was disposable. I looked at Derek, who was watching the exchange with a detached, clinical interest, checking his gold Rolex. Then I looked at Chloe, my daughter, who was wiping her tears carefully to avoid smudging her makeup. I realized, with absolute chilling clarity, that the daughter I raised was dead. The woman standing in front of me was a stranger wearing her face. If this were a movie, this would be the moment I screamed. I would have thrown the envelope in their faces, shattered the china, cursed them to hell. But real devastation doesn't scream. Real devastation is completely silent. It sucks the oxygen out of the room. I didn't say a word. I didn't touch the manila envelope on the table. I turned my back on them and walked slowly up the wooden stairs. My knee ached slightly, a phantom reminder of the trap I had walked into. I went into the master bedroom. I didn't pack my clothes. I didn't pack the expensive jewelry Derek had gifted me over the years. I pulled out a small, vintage leather suitcase from beneath the bed. Inside, I placed a framed photograph of Arthur and me on our wedding day. I packed my favorite editions of Hemingway and Fitzgerald. And finally, from the back of the closet, I pulled out Arthur's old heavy wooden lockbox, the one he always kept the important things in. I closed the suitcase. It was astonishingly light. 40 years of life condensed into a bag I could carry in one hand. When I walked back downstairs, Derek and Chloe were waiting in the hallway. Derek held out a glossy brochure for Golden Pines Assisted Living. "Eleanor, let me call you an Uber to the facility. Your deposit is already paid," Derek said, adopting a tone of forced patience. I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't look at Chloe, who had begun to cry again, a soft, pathetic whimpering that made my stomach turn. I walked past them, out the front door, and down the porch steps. I opened the trunk of my old Subaru, placed the suitcase inside, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered to life. As I drove down the long, oak-lined driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. Chloe was standing on the porch of my house, leaning her head on Derek's shoulder as he wrapped a comforting arm around her. They looked like the perfect, supportive couple who had just made a tough but necessary family decision. I drove through the iron gates, turning onto the county highway. I didn't cry. The betrayal had burned the tears right out of me, leaving nothing behind but cold, hardened ash. They thought they had left me with nothing. They thought they had outsmarted a helpless, senile old woman. But as my hand rested on Arthur's heavy wooden lockbox on the passenger seat, I knew something Derek and Chloe didn't. Arthur Vance was a man who planned for every possible disaster. And he had planned for this one. There is a specific kind of silence that accompanies total displacement. It isn't the peaceful quiet of a farmhouse morning. It is the ringing, sterile silence of a cheap motel room on the edge of the interstate. I spent my first night in a room that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and industrial bleach. The neon sign outside the window flickered, casting a sickly red glow across the thin, floral bedspread. I didn't sleep. I sat in a rigid plastic chair in the corner, staring at the vintage leather suitcase and Arthur's heavy wooden lockbox sitting on the cheap veneer desk. I didn't cry. I think my mind was still trying to process the sheer velocity of the betrayal. Just yesterday, I was planting hydrangeas. Today, I was a homeless widow, discarded by the only two people I had left in the world. Derek had played me beautifully. He had capitalized on my pain, my medication, and my maternal trust, using my own signature as the weapon to destroy me. And Chloe had watched him swing the axe and complained about the blood on her shoes. As dawn broke, painting the motel room in a harsh, unforgiving light, I finally stood up. My knee was stiff, a dull throb reminding me of the vulnerability that had led to this moment. I walked over to the desk and placed my hands on the lockbox. Arthur had always been a man of secrets, but they were never malicious. They were protective. "People will always disappoint you, Ellie," he used to say, adjusting his glasses as he pored over tax codes at the kitchen table. "But a well-drafted legal contract never will." I turned the brass key. The lock clicked open with a heavy, satisfying sound. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or hidden gold. There were only neat, meticulously organized manila folders. The top one was labeled in Arthur's precise handwriting, "In the event of my death, for Eleanor's eyes only." Beneath it was a secondary file, thicker, sealed with red wax. It read, "To be opened only in the presence of Mitchell Reed, Esquire." I didn't open the sealed envelope. I didn't need to. I took a shower, letting the lukewarm water wash away the lingering scent of my old life. I put on my best tailored blazer, a string of simple pearls, and applied a subtle shade of lipstick. I wasn't going to look like a victim. I was going to look like Arthur Vance's wife. Mitchell Reed's law office was located in a historic brick building in downtown Albany, a stark contrast to the flashy glass and steel high-rises where men like Derek Preston operated. Mitchell didn't lease Porsches or wear custom Italian suits. He wore tweed, drank black coffee, and had a mind like a steel trap. He had been Arthur's closest friend and our personal attorney for 3 decades. When his secretary ushered me into his heavy, mahogany-paneled office, Mitchell took one look at my face and stood up, bypassing his desk entirely to pull me into a tight hug. "Eleanor, I got your voicemail," he said, his deep voice rough with concern. He guided me to a plush leather armchair. "Tell me exactly what happened. Leave nothing out." I sat down, placing Arthur's lockbox on his desk. And then I told him everything. I told him about the knee surgery, the oxycodone, the yellow sticky notes, and the general durable power of attorney. I told him about the surveyors, the shell company called Oakwood Investment Group, and the $18,000 check. I told him about Chloe's tears, her debt, and her chilling justification for throwing me out of my own home. Mitchell listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened and the knuckles of his hands, resting on his desk, turned white. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy with a shared, simmering outrage. "That son of a bitch," Mitchell finally breathed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He used a standard fiduciary delegation, slipped it under the guise of medical and tax assistance, and weaponized it. Because it was a general durable POA, it gave him the legal right to transfer real estate on your behalf. "Can we reverse it, Mitch?" I asked, my voice steady. "Can we prove fraud? I was under the influence of narcotics." Mitchell sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "Eleanor, if we go to court to contest the POA based on medical incapacitation, it will take years. We would need testimony from your doctors, psychiatric evaluations, and handwriting experts. And Derek knows this. He knows you don't have the liquid capital to fight a protracted legal battle right now. Furthermore, he's already transferred the deed to Oakwood, which I guarantee is an LLC hidden behind 3 layers of corporate veils. By the time a judge freezes the asset, Derek will have already flipped the property to the developers and hidden the cash offshore. He planned this perfectly." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "So he wins? He just gets to steal my home, toss me into a facility, and walk away?" Mitchell looked at me, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. He looked down at the lockbox on his desk. "Did Derek ask you for any other documents? Did he ask about Arthur's life insurance? His investment portfolios?" "No," I shook my head. "Derek always assumed Arthur's pension and the farm were all we had. Arthur was very private about our finances. He drove a 10-year-old car and wore the same watch for 20 years. Derek thought we were just comfortable middle-class retirees. A slow, sharp smile spread across Mitchell's face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a shark scenting blood in the water. Derek is a commercial real estate broker, Eleanor. He sees the world in terms of visible assets. Land, houses, cars, Mitchell said, reaching out to touch the sealed file I had brought. He thought the farm was your crown jewel. He thought taking it meant he was taking everything. Mitchell broke the red wax seal on Arthur's envelope. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. Your husband was a forensic accountant who spent his life hunting down people exactly like Derek Preston, Mitchell said softly, tracing his finger over the dense legal jargon. Arthur didn't trust Derek from the moment Chloe brought him home. He told me Derek had the eyes of a grifter, so Arthur built a fortress. Mitchell turned the document around so I could see the heading, The Vance Family Irrevocable Generation Skipping Trust. I don't understand, I murmured. Arthur left me everything in his will. He left you the visible assets in his will, Eleanor. The farm, the checking accounts, the cars, Mitchell explained, his eyes gleaming with professional admiration. But 5 years before he died, Arthur quietly liquidated his private equity holdings, his offshore investments, and his stock portfolios. He placed them entirely into this irrevocable trust. Because it's irrevocable, it exists as a separate legal entity. It does not belong to your estate. Therefore, Derek's power of attorney, which only covers your personal estate, cannot touch it. He doesn't even know it exists. How much is in it? I asked, suddenly feeling very small in the large leather chair. Mitchell adjusted his glasses. With compounded interest and the aggressive portfolio Arthur set up, as of this morning, the trust holds approximately $15.2 million. I stopped breathing. $15 million. My mind flashed back to Chloe, sobbing in my dining room, justifying her betrayal because she couldn't afford the mortgage on her townhouse. She had sold her soul and her mother for a $3 million farm, completely unaware that she was standing on top of a gold mine. The trust was designed to take care of you, providing a generous monthly stipend that is dispersed through a blind LLC, which is why Derek never saw it on your standard bank statements, Mitchell continued. However, the principal amount, the $15 million, is designated for Chloe. She is the sole beneficiary, set to receive full control of the trust on her 40th birthday. A wave of profound sickness washed over me. So she gets it all anyway, I whispered, the bitterness tasting like bile. She ruins my life. She steals my home, and in 5 years, she gets $15 million as a reward. Not exactly, Mitchell said, leaning forward, the predatory smile returning to his face. Arthur loved his daughter, but he wasn't blind to her flaws. He knew she was easily manipulated by status and money, and he knew Derek was a parasite. So Arthur instructed me to draft a very specific, extremely aggressive clause into the foundation of the trust. Mitchell flipped to page 42 of the document and highlighted a paragraph with his silver pen. In legal terms, it's an in terrorem clause, sometimes called a bad boy clause. But Arthur liked to call it the morality clause, Mitchell explained. It states, unequivocally, that if the beneficiary, Chloe, or her legal spouse commits any act of fraud, coercion, elder abuse, or breaches any fiduciary duty against the grantor or the grantor's spouse, which is you, the beneficiary is immediately and permanently stripped of all rights to the trust. The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. If the clause is triggered, Mitchell continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, Chloe doesn't get a dime. The entire $15 million is automatically rerouted to a list of designated charities. Furthermore, the clause is retroactive. Any attempt to contest it in court automatically triggers an immediate forfeiture. I stared at the paperwork. My hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from the overwhelming, crushing weight of Arthur's foresight. Even from the grave, my husband was protecting me. He had built a bomb, hidden it beneath the floorboards of our family, and handed me the detonator. Derek committed real estate fraud and breached a fiduciary duty when he sold your property to his own shell company at a submarket rate to flip it, Mitchell stated flatly. And Chloe is legally complicit as his spouse and co-conspirator. They have already triggered the clause, Eleanor. The $15 million is gone. They just don't know it yet. I closed my eyes. The image of Chloe wiping her fake tears, telling me I belonged in a facility, burned behind my eyelids. The image of Derek checking his Rolex as he handed me a check for $18,000. Mitch, I opened my eyes, meeting the lawyer's gaze. The shock and the grief were slowly bleeding out of me, replaced by a cold, unfamiliar steel. If we tell them about the trust now, Derek will just pivot. He'll try to drag us into court, or worse, he'll try to manipulate Chloe into manipulating me. He's a cornered rat. If he finds out he lost $15 million, there's no telling what he might do to protect the money he made from the farm. I agree, Mitchell nodded slowly. If we reveal this now, it's a messy fight. So what do you want to do, Eleanor? I am your attorney. I will follow your lead. I looked out the window of his office, watching the busy street below. People rushing to work, unaware of the quiet, devastating wars being fought in the rooms above them. Derek thinks he's the smartest man in the room. He thinks he's running a perfect, flawless scam, I said, my voice eerily calm. Let him think he won. Let him finalize the sale to the developers. Let him sign the contracts. Let him build his entire future on the money he stole from me. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. You want to let him get away with the farm? I want to let him build a house of cards, I corrected, looking back at Arthur's lockbox. Derek is leveraged. Men like him always are. He stole my farm because his business is failing. If he thinks he has millions coming in from the Oakwood flip, he's going to spend it. He's going to make promises he can't keep. He's going to overextend himself. I leaned over the desk, resting my hands on the mahogany. We wait, Mitchell. We let him commit to the fraud completely. We let him dig the hole so deep he can never climb out. And when he is at his most vulnerable, when he thinks he has secured everything, I paused, a grim, humorless smile touching my lips. That's when we drop the anvil. That's when we tell them about the trust. Mitchell sat back in his chair, taking a deep breath. For a moment, he just looked at me, seeing the woman who had survived the death of her husband, the betrayal of her child, and the loss of her home, all in the span of 5 years. Arthur always said you were the strongest woman he ever met, Mitchell said softly. He closed the trust file and placed his hands on top of it. All right, Eleanor. We play the long game. We let them hang themselves with their own greed. But where are you going to go in the meantime? You can't stay in a roadside motel. I don't need much, I said, picking up my purse. Just a quiet place with a good internet connection. I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy watching the real estate market very closely over the next few weeks. As I walked out of Mitchell Reed's office, the spring air didn't feel quite so cold anymore. I was homeless, yes. I had lost my daughter, yes. But I was no longer a victim. I was the executioner, and I had all the time in the world. For the first time in 40 years, I lived in an apartment. It was a modest 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a quiet brick building in downtown Albany, far away from the sprawling green pastures of my former farm. My life had shrunk to a few hundred square feet, but ironically, I had never felt more liberated. When you are stripped of everything you own, you are also stripped of the fear of losing it. I spent my mornings drinking Earl Grey tea by the window, watching the city wake up, and my afternoons reading the classics I hadn't touched since my teaching days. I was at peace. Derek and Chloe, however, were not. Exactly 4 weeks after I was banished from my home, my burner phone rang. It was Mitchell Reed. Eleanor, his deep voice rumbled through the speaker, carrying a distinct note of professional satisfaction. I told you we would let him build a house of cards. Well, a very stiff breeze just blew through the Hudson Valley. You need to come to my office. When I arrived, Mitchell's large mahogany desk was completely covered in documents, glossy photographs, and a thick black binder labeled Confidential, Preston Investigation. Sitting across from Mitchell was a man I hadn't met before, a quiet, unremarkable-looking man in a beige windbreaker. Eleanor, this is David Vargas, Mitchell introduced us. He's a private investigator I've used for corporate espionage cases. For the past month, he has been Arthur's ghost. quietly trailing your son-in-law. Vargas nodded politely, sliding the black binder toward me. Mrs. Vance, your husband was a very smart man. He taught me a long time ago that if you want to catch a rat, you don't chase him. You just put a camera near the cheese. I sat down, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. Show me. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. Let's start with Derek's master plan. To understand his current state of absolute panic, you have to understand the mechanics of his scam. When Derek stole your farm using the power of attorney, he transferred the deed to Oakwood Investment Group, his own shell company. But to make it look legitimate, Oakwood had to actually buy the property. With what money? I asked. Chloe told me they were practically bankrupt. Exactly. Mitchell smiled sharply. Derek didn't use a traditional bank. Banks ask too many questions. He went to a hard money lender, a private high-risk loan shark who caters to desperate real estate developers. Derek borrowed $2 million at an extortionate interest rate of 15% a month. He used that money to pay off the tiny remainder of your original mortgage, pocketed a chunk to pay off his immediate business debts, and handed you that insulting $18,000 check. So he's $2 million in debt to a loan shark, I summarized, seeing the picture form. Yes, Vargas chimed in, tapping a financial ledger in the binder. But Derek's plan was to flip the farm to the luxury resort developers within a week for $4 million. He would pay back the loan shark, clear his debts, and walk away with a massive untraceable profit. It was a flawless, rapid-fire flip. Mitchell's eyes gleamed. Except it wasn't flawless, because Arthur left behind landmines. I looked at Mitchell, confused. Arthur? 10 years ago, Arthur quietly filed a preliminary environmental conservation survey with the state, noting the presence of an endangered species of brown bat roosting in the old barn, Mitchell explained, unable to hide his smirk. It wasn't a fully binding restriction, but it was buried deep in the county archives. When the resort developers did their final title and environmental sweep last week, the flag popped up. The state immediately suspended the demolition permits pending a full 6-month ecological review. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The sale is frozen. Frozen solid, Mitchell confirmed. The developers legally cannot close the deal until the review is finished. The $4 million is locked in escrow, and Derek's $2 million hard money loan. The first payment was due on Monday. He missed it. The interest is compounding daily. He is financially hemorrhaging. Vargas opened the binder and pushed a series of surveillance photos across the desk. The images were startling. The polished, arrogant man who had walked into my dining room a month ago was gone. In the photos, Derek looked disheveled. His expensive suits were rumpled. In one picture, taken outside a downtown bank, his face was red, the veins in his neck bulging as he screamed into his cell phone. In another, taken at a dimly lit hotel bar, he was slumped over a glass of whiskey, staring blankly at the wall, looking like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. He's unraveling, Vargas said quietly. His firm's accounts are overdrawn. His credit cards are maxed out. The hard money lenders are starting to call his office, threatening to seize his business assets. He is quite literally fighting for his life. I stared at the photos of the man who had destroyed my family. I expected to feel joy, but I only felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. What about Chloe? Does she know? Mitchell and Vargas exchanged a heavy look. This is where the story turns from a standard real estate fraud into a tragedy, Eleanor, Mitchell said softly. He pressed a button on a small digital recorder on his desk. Vargas managed to plant a directional microphone near Derek's regular booth at an upscale steakhouse 3 days ago. Listen, there was a burst of static, followed by the clinking of silverware and background chatter. Then Derek's voice cut through. It wasn't smooth. It was ragged, desperate, and vicious. I don't care what the zoning board says, Lauren. You have to find a loophole. Bribe the inspector, forge a secondary clearance. I don't give a damn. If that escrow doesn't release by Friday, Volkov's guys are going to take my kneecaps. A woman's voice answered. It wasn't Chloe. The voice was younger, sharper, and utterly devoid of sympathy. Keep your voice down, Derek. I'm a title officer, not a magician. The state EPA is involved now. It's completely out of my hands. You promised me this was a clean flip. You said the old lady was out of the way and the daughter was too stupid to look at the paperwork. She is out of the way, Derek hissed, the sound of his fist hitting the table echoing through the recording. I played them both perfectly. Chloe is a moron. She signed the collateral documents last week without even reading them. Are you sure? The woman named Lauren asked. Positive. I told her it was a routine refinancing for the townhouse to cover her country club dues. She co-signed the hard money loan as the primary guarantor. Derek's voice dropped to a sinister, triumphant whisper. When Volkov's guys come to collect, they're going to seize the townhouse. They're going to seize her bank accounts. I've already transferred the remaining liquid cash from the firm into the Cayman LLC under your name. As soon as the walls cave in, I'm filing for bankruptcy, serving Chloe with divorce papers, and flying to Nassau. She's going to be left holding a $2 million bag of debt. The recording clicked off, leaving a suffocating silence in Mitchell's office. I sat completely frozen, staring at the small black device on the desk. The cruelty of it was almost incomprehensible. Lauren Hayes, Vargas provided the context, sliding a photo of a young, striking blonde woman across the desk. She's a 28-year-old senior escrow officer at a rival title company. She and Derek have been having an affair for over a year. She's the one who quietly expedited the fraudulent deed transfer for your farm. And she's the one holding his offshore accounts. My stomach churned. The betrayal was a labyrinth, and Chloe was wandering blindly in the dark, entirely unaware that the monster wasn't chasing me. It was standing right behind her. He didn't just use Chloe to steal my house, I whispered, the full weight of Derek's sociopathy settling over me. He set her up as the human shield for his own crimes. He's going to bankrupt her, divorce her, and leave her at the mercy of loan sharks. Mitchell nodded grimly. Derek is attempting to execute a financial murder-suicide, only he's handing Chloe the poison and taking the parachute for himself. Vargas slid one final photograph toward me. It was a picture of my daughter, taken just 2 days ago. She was walking out of a high-end boutique in Manhattan, carrying 3 designer shopping bags, laughing on her cell phone, wearing her oversized sunglasses. She looked radiant. She looked wealthy. She looked completely, utterly oblivious to the fact that she was dancing on top of a live grenade with the pin already pulled. She thinks she won, I murmured, my finger tracing the edge of the photograph. She threw me away so she could keep buying this garbage. She thinks Derek saved her. Eleanor, Mitchell leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. As your attorney, I have to lay out your options. We have the recordings. We have the paper trail. We have enough evidence to go to the FBI right now and have Derek arrested for wire fraud, bank fraud, and elder abuse. It would stop the collateral damage. It would save Chloe from being destroyed by the loan sharks. I looked up at Mitchell. I thought about the little girl who used to help me bake apple pies in the farmhouse kitchen. I thought about the teenager who cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. And then I thought about the 35-year-old woman who stood in my dining room, watched her husband steal my life savings, and told me I belonged in a facility because I was an inconvenience to her social life. We didn't have a choice. Do you know how much debt we're in? You sit out here all alone, living in the past. It's depressing. Her words echoed in my mind, cold and sharp as a scalpel. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had made a calculated choice to sacrifice her mother on the altar of her own vanity. If I saved her now, she would never learn. She would cry, play the victim, blame Derek entirely, and go back to her shallow, parasitic existence, waiting to inherit her father's $15 million. She would believe that there were no consequences for cruelty. Arthur's words echoed in the silence of the room. A well-drafted legal contract never disappoints you. The morality clause in Arthur's trust wasn't just a punishment. It was a mirror. It was designed to force Chloe to look at her own reflection. And right now, the mirror was still covered. I slowly pushed the photograph of Chloe back across the desk toward Vargas. I squared my shoulders, feeling the last lingering threads of my maternal weakness snap and dissolve into the air. "No," I said, my voice steady, cold, and absolute. Mitchell raised an eyebrow, a silent question in his eyes. "We do not go to the police. We do not warn Chloe. We do not interfere," I instructed, looking Mitchell dead in the eye. "Derek is suffocating. Let him gasp for air. Let him finalize his betrayal. I want Chloe to feel exactly what it is like to be discarded by the person she trusted most in the world. I want her to stand in the ashes of the life she burned down." Mitchell stared at me for a long moment, assessing my resolve. Then a slow, deep smile spread across his face. He reached out and closed the black binder with a definitive thud. "As you wish, Eleanor," Mitchell said softly. "We wait for Derek to strike the match, and when they are both burning, we bring out the trust." I walked out of Mitchell's office and stepped into the bustling city streets. The spring sun was shining, reflecting off the glass windows of the high-rises. Somewhere in this city, Derek Preston was sweating, terrified, watching his empire crumble. Somewhere my daughter was sipping champagne, ignorant of her impending doom. And I was just a retired English teacher, walking back to my small apartment, waiting patiently for the final act of a Shakespearean tragedy to begin. 3 weeks later, the summons arrived. It was a formal request for emergency mediation, drafted by a high-priced downtown law firm. According to Mitchell's sources, the developers of the luxury resort were demanding a sworn affidavit and a comprehensive quitclaim deed directly from me. The state's environmental review regarding Arthur's endangered bats had spooked their legal department. They suspected the initial sale to Derek's shell company was fraudulent, and they refused to release the $4 million from escrow until the original owner, me, signed a legally binding document stating I was of sound mind, fully consented to the sale, and waived all future rights to sue. Derek was trapped. He couldn't forge a notarized affidavit in front of corporate lawyers. He needed my actual signature. He needed the old lady to play nice one last time. The mediation took place in a sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a corporate high-rise. The air conditioning was turned up too high, making the room feel like a meat locker. I wore a tailored navy suit, the one I used to wear to parent-teacher conferences when I had to deliver bad news to entitled parents. Mitchell Reed walked beside me, carrying nothing but a single, slim leather briefcase. When we entered the room, Derek and Chloe were already seated on the opposite side of the long mahogany table. The physical toll of the last month was glaringly obvious. Derek's suit was expensive, but it hung loosely on his frame. His eyes were bloodshot, darting nervously, and the arrogant, practiced smile was completely gone. He was sweating despite the chill in the room. Chloe looked even worse. Her roots were showing, her posture was slumped, and she gripped a paper coffee cup with trembling hands. Vargas's surveillance had confirmed that the loan sharks had begun freezing their joint bank accounts. The reality of bankruptcy was breathing down her neck. "Eleanor," Derek said, his voice tight. He didn't stand up to greet me. He just pushed a thick stack of papers across the polished wood. "Let's skip the pleasantries. We don't have time. Sign the waiver and the quitclaim deed." I sat down slowly, resting my hands on the table. "Good morning, Derek. Chloe, you both look tired." Chloe flinched, staring down at her coffee cup. "Mom, please, just sign it. Things are really bad right now. We need this deal to close today." "Or what?" I asked, my voice calm, conversational. Derek slammed his hand on the table, the sudden noise making Chloe jump. "Or I file an emergency petition for conservatorship by the end of the day," he snarled, dropping the professional mask entirely. "I will have 3 separate psychiatrists testify that your knee medication caused permanent cognitive decline. I will declare you legally incompetent, become your court-appointed guardian, and sign the damn papers myself. You'll spend the rest of your life locked in a memory care ward, Eleanor. Do not test me. I am out of patience." It was a brutal, terrifying threat. If I had been the woman I was 4 months ago, I would have broken down in tears. But I just looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for his profound stupidity. "Conservatorship," Mitchell Reed finally spoke, his deep voice rolling through the room like a thunderclap. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer weight of his tone commanded absolute silence. That is a fascinating legal strategy, Mr. Preston. However, to file for a conservatorship, you must prove to a judge that you are a responsible fiduciary, which might be difficult considering you currently owe $2.4 million to a man named Sergei Volkov. All the color instantly drained from Derek's face. He froze, his mouth slightly open, looking at Mitchell as if the older lawyer had just materialized through the wall. Chloe's head snapped up. What? Who is Sergei Volkov? Shut up, Mitchell, Derek hissed, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. This is a private family mediation. This hasn't been private since you committed wire fraud, Derek, Mitchell interrupted smoothly. He opened his slim leather briefcase. He didn't pull out the trust yet. He pulled out Vargas's black binder. Mitchell extracted a bank statement and slid it across the table toward Chloe. Mrs. Preston, Mitchell addressed my daughter, his tone impeccably polite. Your husband didn't sell your mother's farm to a legitimate company. He sold it to himself. To fund this scam, he borrowed $2 million from a violent, unregulated lending syndicate. Because he is defaulting on that loan, the syndicate is now targeting your assets. Specifically, the collateral. Chloe's eyes widened in terror. She looked at Derek. Collateral? Derek, what is he talking about? You said the papers I signed last week were for the country club dues. He lied to you, Chloe, I said quietly. He did more than lie. Mitchell placed a second document on the table. It was a photograph of Lauren Hayes, alongside a printout of an offshore wire transfer. Derek knows he can't pay back the loan sharks, so for the past 3 weeks he has been liquidating your husband and wife brokerage accounts. He has wired $400,000 to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, registered to a 28-year-old title officer named Lauren Hayes, his mistress. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. Chloe stared at the photograph of the young, beautiful blonde woman. She stared at the wire transfer with her own name listed as the drained account holder. Her breathing became shallow, rapid. Derek? Chloe's voice was a fragile, high-pitched whisper. You drained my savings? You're sleeping with her? Chloe, don't listen to them. It's a manipulation tactic. Derek stammered, his eyes wide with panic. He reached out to grab her arm, but she recoiled violently, her chair scraping loudly against the glass wall behind her. Don't touch me! Chloe screamed, her voice cracking. She looked at the documents again, the reality of her husband's sociopathy finally tearing through her denial. You made me co-sign a loan to the Russian mob? You were going to leave me with the debt while you ran away with her? I was trying to save our lifestyle, Derek yelled back, completely losing his composure, looking wildly between Chloe, Mitchell, and me. The old lady was supposed to be out of the way. If the EPA hadn't flagged the property, none of this would be happening. Just sign the damn quitclaim, Eleanor, and I can fix this. You can't fix anything, Derek, I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a blade. You are a parasite. You built your life by feeding on other people, and now you have run out of hosts. I turned to my daughter. She was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face, her designer clothes suddenly looking like a clown costume. Mom, Chloe choked out, looking at me with absolute despair. Mom, please. I didn't know about the mistress. I didn't know about the loan sharks. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to go to jail. Please, you have to help me. I'm your daughter. I looked into her eyes. I searched my heart for that familiar maternal ache, the instinct to shield her from the consequences of her own actions. But there was nothing there. You are my daughter, I agreed softly. And because you are my daughter, your father made sure you would always be taken care of. Mitchell reached into his briefcase one final time. He brought out the heavy watermarked file bearing Arthur's seal. Arthur Vance was a brilliant man. Mitchell addressed the room, though his eyes were fixed entirely on Chloe. 5 years before he died, he established an irrevocable generation-skipping trust. He liquidated his offshore accounts and private equity portfolios to fund it. As of this morning, the trust is valued at $15.2 million. Derek stopped breathing. His eyes bulged as he stared at the heavy legal folder. 15 million? He whispered, the sheer magnitude of the number short-circuiting his brain. He had destroyed his life and risked the wrath of the mob for a $3 million farm, completely unaware he was sleeping in the same bed as a $15 million heiress. Chloe's tears stopped. A sudden, desperate spark of hope ignited in her eyes. 15 million? My dad left me $15 million? She looked at me, a hysterical, relieved laugh bubbling in her throat. Mom, we can pay off the loan sharks. I can hire a divorce lawyer and destroy Derek. I'm rich. You were rich, Chloe, Mitchell corrected her, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register. You were the sole beneficiary, but Arthur knew exactly who you married, and he knew your weaknesses, so he included an in terra rem provision, the morality clause. Mitchell opened the file, sliding it across the table so it rested precisely between Chloe and Derek. The clause states that if you or your legal spouse commit any act of fraud, financial abuse, or coercion against Eleanor Vance, you are immediately, permanently, and irrevocably stripped of your status as a beneficiary. Mitchell recited from memory, his eyes cold and unyielding. Chloe's expression froze. The fragile spark of hope in her eyes extinguished, replaced by a horror so profound it seemed to hollow out her cheekbones. No, Chloe whispered, shaking her head. No, I didn't do anything. It was Derek. Derek forged the sale. Derek tricked her. You stood in my dining room, I reminded her, my voice steady, carrying the weight of a judge handing down a sentence. You watched him hand me a check for $18,000. You told me I belonged in an institution so you could pay your credit card bills. You were legally married, and you were a willing accessory after the fact. Mitchell, Chloe begged, turning to the lawyer, her hands clasped together in prayer. Please, there has to be a loophole. I'll annul the marriage. I'll give Mom back the farm. Please, you can't take $15 million away from me. It's my father's money. It was your father's money. Now it belongs to the Women's Shelter of Albany in the Hudson Valley Elder Justice Center, Mitchell stated, closing the file. The forfeiture was triggered the moment Derek filed the fraudulent deed. The money has already been legally rerouted. It is gone, Chloe. Forever. I watched the exact moment my daughter's soul shattered. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had thrown away her mother, her home, and her moral compass for a man who despised her, and in doing so, she had literally set fire to a $15 million winning lottery ticket. She let out a sound, a guttural, agonizing wail of pure grief, and buried her face in her hands, sobbing so violently her entire body shook. Derek, however, had gone completely still. His mind was racing, doing the desperate math of a dying man. He had no farm, he had no trust fund, he had no offshore escape because Mitchell had the wire transfers. He was $2 million in debt to men who killed for sport. You planned this, Derek hissed at me, his face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. He lunged across the table, his hands reaching for my throat. You old bitch! You set me up! He didn't make it halfway across the table. The glass door of the conference room swung open with a sharp click. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside. They weren't private security. They had gold badges clipped to their belts. Derek Preston, the lead agent said, stepping forward. FBI Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, and the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Derek froze, his hands still outstretched over the mahogany wood. He looked at the agents, then at Mitchell, and finally at me. The realization dawned on him. I hadn't just beaten him in a boardroom, I had orchestrated his complete and total destruction. As the federal agent pulled Derek's arms behind his back and the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Derek didn't fight. The arrogance, the ambition, the manipulative charm, it all evaporated, leaving nothing but a hollow, terrified shell of a man. Mrs. Preston, the second FBI agent looked down at Chloe, who was still weeping into her hands. We also have a warrant for your arrest as a co-conspirator. However, the district attorney has authorized me to offer you a choice." Chloe looked up, her mascara running in thick black rivers down her pale cheeks. "Your mother and Mr. Reed brought this case to us," the agent explained calmly. "If you agree to testify against your husband, and if you hand over the ledgers regarding his dealings with the Volkov Syndicate, the DA will reduce your charges to a misdemeanor with probation. You won't serve prison time." Chloe looked at Derek. Her husband, the man who had bought her designer bags, the man who had promised her the world, and the man who was currently trying to abandon her to the mob. Then she looked at me. "Mom," she whispered, a final desperate plea for a mother's protection. "What do I do?" I stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles from my navy suit. I picked up my purse. "You do what you have always done, Chloe," I said, my voice empty of anger, empty of love, empty of everything. "You look out for yourself." I didn't wait to hear her answer. I turned my back on the wreckage of my family and walked out of the glass-walled room. I walked past the reception desk, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, sealing away the screams, the handcuffs, and the tears, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked older, but for the first time in months, my shoulders weren't heavy. Arthur's trap had sprung perfectly. The rats were caught, and I was finally free. Time is a strange equalizer. It does not erase the past, but it has a way of settling the dust, revealing the permanent landscape left behind after a storm. 6 months had passed since the glass doors of the downtown conference room closed on my daughter and her husband. In that half year, the wheels of justice, aided by Arthur's meticulous financial traps, crushed Derek Preston into dust. He didn't get the luxury of a long, dramatic trial. When the FBI raided his office, they found the ledgers connecting him to Sergei Volkov's lending syndicate. When they raided his offshore accounts, they found the money he had stolen not just from me, but from 3 other elderly clients. Faced with 30 years in federal lockup, Derek took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 8 years in a medium security facility. But federal prison was the least of Derek's problems. Lauren Hayes, his young, brilliant mistress, had taken one look at the FBI agents, surrendered the Cayman accounts for full immunity, and vanished without a trace. Derek was left completely bankrupt, disgraced, and owing $2 million to a Russian syndicate that had a very long reach, even behind prison walls. According to Mitchell, Derek had already requested solitary confinement for his own physical safety. He would spend the next 8 years looking over his shoulder in a 6x9 concrete cell. As for the farm, the state quickly voided the fraudulent deed. The property was returned to my name. But when I drove up that long, oak-lined driveway one last time, it didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. The ghosts of the betrayal were too loud. The dining room felt tainted. So I sold it. Legally, transparently, and on my own terms. I sold it to a young, hard-working couple who wanted to start an organic apple orchard and raise their 3 children in the fresh air. They paid a fair market price, and I walked away with a clean conscience. I didn't buy a penthouse or a luxury condo. I used my own savings and a portion of the farm's sale to buy a small, beautiful cedar-shingled cottage on the edge of Lake George. It had a wraparound porch, a stone fireplace, and a dock that stretched out into the crystal-clear water. It was quiet. It was mine. It was a crisp Tuesday afternoon in late November. I was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool shawl, drinking Earl Grey tea and watching the autumn leaves drift onto the surface of the lake. The crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. I didn't turn my head immediately. I just took another sip of my tea. I watched a rusted 10-year-old Honda Civic sputter into my driveway. It parked crookedly, the engine rattling for a few seconds before dying with a metallic wheeze. The driver's side door creaked open and Chloe stepped out. If you had shown me a photograph of this woman a year ago, I wouldn't have recognized my own daughter. The designer silk blouses and oversized sunglasses were gone. She was wearing a faded, oversized gray polo shirt with the logo of a budget interstate motel stitched onto the breast pocket. Her hair, once perfectly highlighted and styled, was pulled back in a harsh, messy clip, exposing the dark, unkempt roots. She wore cheap, scuffed sneakers. Her hands, once manicured and soft, looked red and raw. She walked slowly up the wooden steps of my porch. She didn't have the confident, arrogant stride of the woman who used to micromanage charity galas. She walked like a woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Hello, Chloe," I said, my voice as calm and flat as the surface of the lake. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer her a chair. Chloe stopped at the top of the stairs. She looked at the cottage, the peaceful water, and finally at me. Her lower lip trembled. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, exhausted. "What brings you all the way up here?" I asked, setting my teacup on the small wooden table beside me. Chloe wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the autumn wind. She didn't have a coat. I got your address from Mitchell's office. I begged his secretary for an hour before she gave it to me. Mitchell's secretary is very fiercely loyal. You must have put on quite a performance." The sarcasm didn't even make her flinch. She just looked at her shoes. "I'm working as a housekeeper, Mom, at a Motel 6 off Interstate 87. I clean 16 rooms a day, scrubbing toilets, changing sheets for truck drivers." "It's honest work," I noted simply. "There is no shame in honest work." "My townhouse was foreclosed," she continued, a desperate rising panic in her voice. "The bank took my car. Derek's lawyers emptied whatever was left in our joint accounts before the feds froze them. I have an apartment the size of a closet, and I have to take 2 buses just to get to a job that barely pays for my groceries." She looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. But they weren't the manipulative, theatrical tears she had cried in my dining room all those months ago. These were the tears of a woman who had finally hit rock bottom and realized the concrete was unforgiving. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Chloe sobbed, dropping to her knees on the wooden planks of my porch. "I was so stupid. I was blind. Derek manipulated me. He lied to me. He made me think we were doing the right thing for you. I never wanted you to be hurt. I swear to God I didn't." I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet. I searched my soul, looking for that spark of maternal weakness, that biological imperative to reach down, pull my child into my arms, and tell her everything would be all right. But the fire was completely burned out. There were only ashes left. "Stop lying, Chloe," I said quietly. Her sobbing hitched. She looked up at me, confused. "Derek didn't manipulate you into anything," I said, my voice steady and cold. "He offered you an easy way out of your debt, and you took it. You knew exactly what he was doing when you watched him hand me that $18,000 check. You didn't cry because you felt guilty. You cried because you felt inconvenienced by my presence. You chose your lifestyle over your mother." "People make mistakes," she pleaded, reaching out to grasp the hem of my skirt. "I lost everything, Mom. I lost my husband, my home, my friends. Please, you're the only family I have left." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the front door of my cottage, as if looking for a hidden vault. "Mitchell said the trust, the $15 million, he said it was gone. But there has to be a way to appeal it, right? You're the grantor's wife. You can tell the lawyers I was under duress. You can reinstate my beneficiary status. Just give me a fraction of it, Mom. Just enough to get a decent apartment. To start over. Dad wouldn't want me to live like a peasant." There it was. The ugly, unfiltered truth. She hadn't driven 3 hours to apologize to her mother. She had driven 3 hours to beg the gatekeeper for her father's money. I gently but firmly pulled my skirt out of her grasp. "Your father," I said, leaning forward so she could see the absolute finality in my eyes, "wanted you to be a decent human being. When you proved you weren't, his fail-safe activated. And I did not stop it." Chloe stared at me, her breath hitching. "The trust is gone, Chloe. It isn't frozen. It isn't pending. It is gone," I explained, enunciating every word clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. "The day Derek was arrested, Mitchell executed the morality clause. The entire $15.2 million was irrevocably transferred out of the Vance family name. Where? Chloe gasped, her face pale. $5 million went to the Hudson Valley Women's Shelter to help women escape financially abusive husbands like yours. I listed them off, feeling a profound sense of pride. $5 million went to the National Center on Elder Abuse to provide free legal counsel for seniors who have been scammed by their own families. And the remaining $5 million established a permanent scholarship fund for underprivileged public high school students. The paperwork is finalized. The accounts are closed. Chloe looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. The reality of the loss, the sheer magnitude of $15 million slipping through her fingers forever, was a physical weight crushing the air from her lungs. You gave it away, she whispered, her voice hollow. You gave my inheritance to strangers. You left me with nothing. I left you with exactly what you gave me, Chloe, I replied, my voice hard as flint. Only you don't have a mother to steal from anymore. I stood up. I picked up my teacup. You have a long drive back to your motel, I said, turning toward the front door. Drive safely, and please, do not come back here. This property is private. Mom! Chloe screamed, a ragged, desperate sound that echoed across the quiet lake. Mom, you can't do this. I'm your daughter. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't look back at her. My daughter died the day she told me I belonged in a facility, I said quietly. Goodbye, Chloe. I walked inside and closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I didn't look out the window. I walked into my cozy, fire-lit living room, sat down in my favorite armchair, and picked up my book. For 10 minutes, I heard her sobbing on the porch. I heard her begging through the thick oak door. I didn't move. I didn't shed a single tear. Eventually, the crying stopped. I heard the heavy, defeated footsteps walking back down the wooden stairs. I heard the rusted engine of the Honda Civic struggle to life, the tires crunching on the gravel, and the sound fading away down the long country road until there was nothing left but the sound of the wind. I looked at the mantelpiece above the fireplace. Arthur's heavy wooden lockbox sat there, polished and gleaming in the firelight. It was empty now. The secrets were out. The traps had been sprung. The justice he had engineered from beyond the grave had been delivered flawlessly. Many people believe that family is an unconditional bond, a blood tie that demands endless forgiveness, endless sacrifice, and endless suffering. I used to believe that too. But as I sat there, listening to the quiet, peaceful lapping of the lake water against my dock, I realized the truth. Love is not a license to abuse, and sometimes the most profound act of self-love is having the courage to walk away from the people who are holding the match to your life. Derek and Chloe had built their lives on a foundation of greed, lies, and the exploitation of a mother's love. They had lit the fire, expecting me to burn. Instead, they burned their own house down. And from the ashes of their betrayal, I had built my peace. I took a sip of my tea. It was still warm. I opened my book to the first chapter, and for the first time in my life, I started reading a story where I already knew exactly how perfectly it was going to end.